Frank Fritz, once a beloved star of American Pickers, spent his final days in a battle far more difficult than any treasure hunt. After a severe stroke in 2022, the man who brought history to life was left partially paralyzed and dependent on round-the-clock care. His antique shop crumbled, and despite a heartfelt reunion with Mike Wolfe, Frank's health rapidly declined. By September 2024, Frank had passed away at age 60, marking a tragic end to his journey. What really happened in those final years of Frank Fritz's life will shock you. Believe me, you don't want to miss it. You've probably heard about American Pickers if you're a fan of history and reality TV. It's the kind of show that takes you back to simpler times, where things weren't just about the shiny new gadgets, but about finding hidden treasures. Mike Wolfe, one of the main guys on the show, started picking when he was just 4 years old. Can you imagine that? A little kid already obsessed with old bikes and anything with wheels? That love stuck with him, and he carried it into the show, always excited to find an old motorcycle or bicycle that hadn't been touched in years. Then there's Frank Fritz. If Mike was the guy looking for things on wheels, Frank was the one who had a passion for antique toys and oil cans. The two were like opposites in some ways, but that's what made them work so well together. Mike was always ready to jump into a conversation, ready to strike a deal with sellers who didn't always want to let go of their prized possessions. Frank was more laid back, quieter, but with a sharp eye for details. He could spot something valuable in the corner of a dusty old barn that others might walk right by. The two of them, driving around the country in their van, made it seem like they were just having a good time with old friends. As the show went on, people really connected with them. It wasn't just about the antiques they found. It was about the journey. The way they worked together and their back-and-forth jokes made it feel like you were right there with them, watching as they uncovered these forgotten pieces of history. And what was special about the show was that every item they found seemed to have a story. It wasn't just an old sign from a gas station or a dusty motorcycle. No, it was a memory of someone's past, a piece of history that had been left behind. Over time, the partnership that seemed so solid started to crack. Fans began to notice that Frank wasn't on the show as much. At first, people thought maybe it was just a one-time thing, but as more episodes aired without him, the rumors started. What was going on? It turned out Frank had been going through some tough times. He opened up in an interview, explaining that he had undergone major back surgery. It wasn't a small operation either. He had 185 stitches and 2 rods put in his spine. And then, on top of that, he shared that he'd been battling Crohn's disease for years. If you don't know, Crohn's is a condition that affects your digestive system, and it can cause a lot of pain and discomfort. For Frank, it was a constant struggle, and with the pandemic, things only got harder. The travel required for American Pickers is a lot for anyone, but for someone dealing with serious health issues, it's nearly impossible. Most people were understanding when they found out about Frank's health. They got why he had to step back for a bit. But as more time passed, fans couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story. Was Frank's absence only about his health, or was there something else going on behind the scenes? That's when things started to come to light. It wasn't just about Frank's health anymore. There were whispers that Mike and Frank weren't as close as they once were. Maybe all those years on the road had taken their toll. It's hard to say what really happened, but you could feel that things had shifted. You could sense that the friendship that had once been so strong was now strained. And that's when people really started to worry. Fans wanted to know if Frank was ever going to come back, or if his time on the show was truly over. Frank didn't shy away from sharing his side of things. He talked about how much he missed being on the road with Mike and how he wanted to come back. But by then, it felt like too much had happened. In July 2021, Frank Fritz finally spoke up after a long silence. Frank revealed in an interview that he hadn't decided to leave the show. He was actually let go. The network chose not to bring him back, even though the show kept going without him. That was a hard pill to swallow for Frank, but what really stung the most was how his friend Mike Wolfe handled everything. Frank and Mike had been picking together for years, driving around the country and making the show a success. They were close, like brothers, or at least that's what Frank thought. But during his recovery from surgery, Frank said Mike never reached out to check on him, not even a simple phone call. Frank was hurt. He shared how the silence from Mike had made everything worse. "He knew my back was messed up, but he didn't call me up and ask how I was doing," Frank said. It was as if Mike had just moved on without him, and that deepened the gap between them. As Frank opened up more, you could see that there had been tension building for a long time. It wasn't just the lack of communication after his surgery that bothered him. Frank felt like he had been pushed to the side even before that. The show, in his eyes, had started to become more and more about Mike. He compared it to being in a rock band where one guy gets all the attention, like Steven Tyler in Aerosmith. "It's like you've got Aerosmith, and there's Steven Tyler, and he's the front man," Frank said. "I found my spot, I'm second, and he's number one on the show. That's no problem with me. Maybe he does have a problem." It's easy to see why Frank would feel that way. Over time, the show did seem to focus more on Mike, and Frank felt like he was being left out. He started to feel like he wasn't valued, even though he had been a big part of the show's success from the beginning. The fun and camaraderie that made American Pickers so popular had faded for Frank. Mike finally responded to the growing buzz around Frank's interview, but instead of diving into the details of what had gone wrong between them, Mike took a different approach. He kept things polite and professional. In a statement, he talked about their long journey together and wished Frank well. "I have known Frank for as long as I can remember. He's been like a brother to me," Mike said. He mentioned that the years they had spent together on the show had brought highs and lows, challenges and blessings, but that it had also been rewarding. Even though Mike's words were kind, it didn't feel like he really addressed what Frank was talking about. There was no mention of why he hadn't reached out during Frank's recovery, or why Frank felt like he had been left behind. For some fans, Mike's response felt a little cold, like he was just trying to say the right thing, without really getting into the heart of the matter. It didn't seem like a real effort to make things right between them. While all this was happening, Danielle Colby, another key member of the American Pickers team, decided to speak up too. Danielle had been with Mike and Frank from the start, handling things from the office and even joining them on some of their picks. She had always been an important part of the show. In the middle of this back and forth between Mike and Frank, Danielle made it clear where her loyalty lay. She posted a message on Instagram, standing by Mike and praising how he had handled everything. "I'm proud of how you have handled the last 12 years and look forward to many more years of rolling around this big blue marble together," she wrote, sharing a picture of her and Mike. But Danielle's message didn't stop there. She also hinted at something deeper, something that wasn't out in the open yet. She mentioned that Frank had caused a lot of pain for himself and that it had been hard to watch. Her words suggested that maybe there was more going on behind the scenes, problems that hadn't been shared publicly yet. It made people wonder if Frank's struggles with alcoholism, something he had talked about before, were part of what had led to the fallout. Frank had been open about his battle with alcohol. In his interview, he shared how he had spent 77 days in rehab to get sober. It wasn't an easy journey, but Frank was determined to turn his life around. He had been motivated to quit drinking after losing both his mother and grandfather to alcohol-related issues. "I didn't like drinking anymore. My mom was an alcoholic and she died 5 years ago and it was alcohol-related," Frank said. "My grandfather was an alcoholic and he died. That didn't sit well with me." Despite the progress Frank had made in getting sober, it seemed like his past struggles with alcohol had created a rift that wasn't easy to fix. Mike, in one of the rare moments he talked about Frank's addiction, hinted that it was one of the reasons Frank hadn't been able to return to the show. "We all do care about Frank, and we want him back on the show," Mike said. "We would absolutely love to, but he just can't get it right." Those words showed that, in Mike's eyes, Frank's recovery wasn't quite where it needed to be yet. By 2022, the story of Frank Fritz took a sad turn that shocked many fans. Frank, the man who had once traveled all over America hunting for treasures with Mike Wolfe, suffered a devastating stroke. It left him fighting for his life in a hospital, unable to move the right side of his body. For someone who had spent years on the road, digging through old barns and garages, finding the hidden gems of American history, this was a heartbreaking twist. Now, he was bedridden, his future uncertain. While Frank focused on recovering from the stroke, the world around him seemed to fall apart. His antique store, Frank Fritz Finds, was over 200 miles away from where he was being treated in Des Moines, and it wasn't doing well. The store had once been a hidden treasure for collectors and antique lovers, but now it was falling into disrepair. Pictures showed peeling paint, uneven floorboards, and even exposed wires poking through the walls. The back room of the Hog Dogs bar and restaurant, where the store was located, had become cold and unwelcoming. Customers complained about bad lighting, and during the winter it was so freezing that people didn't want to stay. The shelves and antiques were covered in dust and cobwebs, giving the store a ghostly feel. It was nothing like the lively place Frank had built with his love for antiques. Frank, still dealing with the aftermath of his stroke, couldn't manage the store like he used to. His friends saw how bad things were and decided to file for an emergency temporary guardianship and conservatorship. Frank's condition was so severe that he could no longer take care of himself or manage his business. The court agreed, and it became clear that Frank needed someone to help make decisions for him, both for his health and his finances. The guardianship meant that Frank would be protected, but it also meant that his independence was slipping away. Even though the store was struggling, Frank tried to stay connected to it. The conservatorship allowed him to still choose and price the items being sold, which kept him involved in the world he loved. However, the reality was hard to ignore. The store's sales had dropped drastically, bringing in only $25,000 for the year. With his credit score also dropping to a concerning level, the business was at serious risk. Despite everything, a small glimmer of hope appeared in November when renovations were completed. New windows brought in more light, a simple change that brightened up the once dark space. But for Frank, the road ahead was still long and difficult. He was in an assisted living facility, going through intense physical therapy in the hope of regaining some of his strength. The news of Frank's stroke hit the American Pickers community hard. Fans who had followed him for years were worried about what would happen next, and so was Mike Wolfe. Despite the tension between them, Mike didn't hesitate to speak out. He posted on Instagram, asking people to pray for Frank. Instead of addressing the years of silence and conflict, Mike focused on the importance of his friend's recovery. "Now is not the time to set the record straight," Mike wrote. "Now is the time to pray for my friend. Frank, I pray more than anything that you make it through this okay. I love you, buddy." It was a heartfelt plea, showing that no matter what had happened between them, their bond ran deep. Months later, in 2023, something happened that many fans had been waiting for. Mike and Frank reunited. It had been nearly 3 years since they had last seen each other, and the moment was emotional. Both men were deeply moved, sharing stories of the old times, and remembering one of their earliest nerve-wracking appearances on The Late Show with David Letterman. During their reunion, Mike told Frank, "Nobody can replace you, Frank." Those words meant a lot. They acknowledged what fans had known all along. Frank brought something special to American Pickers that couldn't be replaced by anyone else. His unique sense of humor, his easygoing nature, and his love for antiques made him a key part of the show's success. This reunion, while full of tears, was a moment of healing between two old friends. But as Frank's health continued to decline, things took a tragic turn. By 2024, he was partially paralyzed and bedridden. His condition worsened, and it became clear that he needed 24-hour care. He had to use a wheelchair and could no longer live on his own. His farmhouse had a ramp installed, and his friends continued to care for him as best as they could. It was heartbreaking to see someone who had been so full of life now so limited by his health. The once lively picker who traveled across America was now spending his days in hospice care in Davenport, Iowa. Sadly, on September 30th, 2024, Frank passed away at the age of 60. His death certificate later revealed that he had died from late sequela of cerebral infarction, a medical term meaning that the stroke had ultimately caused his death. He also suffered from aortic stenosis, a condition that makes it hard for blood to flow through the body. Both conditions contributed to his declining health, and despite his fight, Frank's body couldn't recover. When Frank passed, Mike Wolfe was at his bedside. Mike posted a tribute on Instagram, mourning the loss of his longtime friend. "It's with a broken heart that I share with all of you that Frank passed away last night," Mike wrote. He reflected on their many years together, sharing memories of the countless trips they took, the miles they traveled, and the adventures they had in search of history. "We've been on countless trips and shared so many miles, and I feel blessed that I was there by his side when he took one last journey home. I love you, buddy, and will miss you so much." It was a touching message that showed just how much Frank meant to him. Danielle Colby, another important part of the American Pickers family, also posted a tribute. "Frank, I will miss your ability to make everyone laugh, your love for talking tattoos, your epic collections. But what I will miss the most are those little glimpses of vulnerability from time to time," she wrote. Danielle and Frank had bonded over their shared love for tattoos and other personal moments, and her message captured the unique impact Frank had on the people around him. Frank's death marked the end of an era for American Pickers. While the show continues, there's no denying the void he left behind. Frank wasn't just another host. He was a key part of what made the show feel real and relatable. His easygoing nature, his sharp eye for valuable finds, and his humor made the show what it was. For fans, American Pickers will never be the same without him. Even though the show moves on, many will always feel like something is missing. Frank Fritz may be gone, but the impact he made on the show and on the lives of those who watched him will never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this look back at Frank Fritz's life and legacy, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more videos like this. We'd love to hear your favorite memories of Frank from American Pickers. Let's keep his memory alive by sharing the stories that made him such a beloved figure. Thanks for watching.